the recipe for bread making. Now this particular recipe you need to check before you watch it all the way through to see if you've got any yeast at home. It will either come in sachets like this or in a drum like this. And if you've got yeast, that's great, well done, because it's quite hard to get at the moment. The other thing you need is some strong or some bread flour. If you don't have strong bread flour and you don't have yeast, then you can't make the bread on this occasion, but you might want to have a look at the other video I've uploaded which uses plain flour. However, if you have got your yeast and your bread flour, then this is how you're going to make some bread rolls. The first thing you're going to do is get yourself ready to cook. So for me, I've got an apron on, I've just washed my hands with soap, and I have also sprayed down my surfaces. If my hair touched my shoulders, I would tie it back. I then am just going to clean my surfaces off, and you need to ask your parent or carer at home how they would like you to clean those surfaces off because they will know exactly how they do that in your house. Next thing we're going to do then is to measure out some warm liquid, hopefully from the yeast experiment, which you should have watched before you've got onto this practical. You will remember that yeast likes water. It likes it to be warm and not really hot or really cold. It also likes some sugar because that's its food. So first thing we're going to do is to get some warm water ready for the yeast. Now I need 200 ml of water. So on the side of your measuring jug you need to see where it says 200 millilitres, and that's where you're going to be pouring up to in total. However, you're going to use about 100 ml of water that's come from the kettle that has boiled recently. So remember how to use and to measure things carefully, but also how to use the kettle safely. So you might want to just revisit that clip on how to use the kettle. And I'm pouring just about 100 millilitres of water in from the kettle that then gets replaced in the base unit. Please measure your water out where your kettle is. Don't move your kettle around the room. Measure it out over where your kettle belongs, and then the next stage you're going to take this water over to the tap and you're going to add some cold water in up until 200 millilitres. If I added my cold water in from the tap, you'd see my back right now. So I've actually just put some cold water from the tap in this measuring jug, and because I know I've got 100 millilitres of boiling water just over, I'm going to add 100 millilitres of cold water. Now before I do anything else, I'm going to touch the outside of my measuring jug. It should feel warm and not hot. At the moment this feels hot. It means that there is not enough cold water in there. So I'm going to add a little bit more cold water because the important thing is getting the temperature of the water right, and then we'll tip it out until we get to 200 millilitres. When I now touch the outside of this measuring jug, it feels warm and not hot. At this stage I can put my little finger in carefully and it should feel like the water is warm. It shouldn't feel hot, like it's going to burn you, and it shouldn't feel cold, because remember, yeast likes warmth. However, now I've got the right temperature, I can see that I've got 300 millilitres of water. So I now need to carefully tip down the drain 100 ml of this water. Let's do that quickly for you. And then when I come back and I put it on the work surface and crouch down, it says 200 millilitres. To this then, you're going to add your yeast. Now, I have got a sachet of yeast here. If you've got a sachet of yeast, add the whole sachet in with your water. I'm not going to use a sachet because I've got a drum of yeast that is opened and needs using up. If you've got loose yeast like this, you need 2 heaped teaspoons. And that will give you exactly the same quantity as 1 sachet of yeast. That goes in with your water, because the yeast, remember, likes warmth and some water. The last thing I'm going to add to this water before I put it to one side is some sugar. This is just normal caster sugar, but you could even use granulated sugar if that's what you've got at home. And I want to give the yeast 1 heaped teaspoon of the sugar, because if you remember, yeast worked better when it had some food like sugar. I'm then going to give this a quick stir, and then I'm going to put this measuring jug to one side. And then I'm going to start weighing out my final 2 ingredients. I'm going to bring my electronic scales over with a measuring bowl, a mixing bowl, sorry, and I'm going to switch the scales on with the bowl on top. As you remember, you turn the scales on once the bowl is on top. Otherwise you will be weighing the weight of your bowl and you will never get bread that works very successfully because you won't be able to add the right amount of liquid necessarily. It will turn into a sticky mess. So I've switched it on and it now says 0G. If your scales with the bowl on do not say 0G, please check with your parent or carer and ask them to help you to get it to say 0G. To this then, I'm going to add 300 grams of bread flour. It's called bread, or it might be called strong flour, depending on how they label the bag up. Now the important thing to know with bread flour is that it's higher in a particular protein called gluten. And gluten helps to make your dough elastic. When we knead the bread later on, we develop gluten and it forms like a stretchy net, and that will trap the bubbles of CO2 that our yeast will be making. When it traps that CO2 and holds onto it, it aerates the bread and the bread rolls will rise as they trap more and more CO2. So I've got 300 grams of bread flour in the bowl. To that I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. Now I don't like things too salty, so actually I've got half a teaspoon measure here, and I'm going to add about half a teaspoon. I'll go for the first half, not over the bowl, because if I have an accident, because it's a very big canister of salt, I don't want it all going in and spoiling my bread flour. So that's half a teaspoon, and I'm just going to add about another third, so it will be just over half a teaspoon of salt's gone in. And at this point I'm going to take my scales away, because if I work on top of my scales while I'm mixing, I'll break them. I then get my yeast, which if you just have a little look inside, you'll see that the yeast is already fermenting and producing bubbles of CO2 in there. So we want that now to get into our bread flour to start making our dough. So I'm going to make a little well in the centre of my flour, and then I'm going to add about 2/3 of my water. Please do a last quick check to make sure it's definitely 200 mils, and add about 2/3 of that in. I'm going to try and get as much yeasty bits in as possible, because obviously that's what's going to help to make this bread rise. Then I'm using a knife that I've used to butter my bread to just bring this together. I'm looking to have no lumps of, or no bits of flour left at the bottom of the bowl, and I will look for large lumps to form. So there's some large lumps forming, but there's still a lot of flour at the bottom of the bowl. So I'm going to add another couple of tablespoons of liquid. Now the reason we add this liquid gradually is that you can always add more liquid, but if you add too much you can't take it out. We don't want our dough to become porridge, because then we'll have to add lots of flour to it and it will affect the ratio, and the yeast will have a much harder job to do to try and get enough CO2 to make all of the rolls rise. So I've now got some quite large lumps of bread dough in there, but I've still got little bits of flour on the bottom. So I'm going to add about another tablespoon of water. I might not need all the water. If you're using a wholemeal flour, you might need to use a little bit more water, because wholemeal flour is very high in fibre, and that tends to suck up a little bit more water and absorb a bit more water. So now I've got large lumps formed, and there's not really very much flour in the bottom. So at this stage I'm going to take the knife out, put it to one side to wash up later, and I'm going to go in with my hand and bring this together to form a dough. I can get all of those little bits of flour incorporated at the bottom of the bowl, so that it makes it easier to wash up, but also just helps the ratios to be right. And then at this stage we're going to start to knead. So I've still got some water left over, so you may not need to add all of your yeast water. Just important to know that. So to knead this then, we're going to press down with either the heel of our hand or the knuckles. And as we push down, we're going to push the dough away. We'll then turn it a quarter of a turn and press down again. So if you watch carefully, I'll show you how I'm going to do it. So the first time I'm going to push down using the heel of my hand. I twist the dough a quarter of a turn, so the bit that's at 12 o'clock goes to 3 o'clock on a clock face. Then I stretch the dough out again, lift it up and over and press down. Now at this stage, some people like to add lots of flour to this mixture, and can I urge you not to do this? This is because adding flour to this mixture, unless it's actually sticking to the work surface, will ruin the ratio of the ingredients in this. And actually you do want your dough to be a little bit more sticky rather than dry. Too sticky just means that you've got a little bit more water, so that when it goes into the oven to cook, the excess water, excuse me, I've got something cooking, I'll turn that off. The excess water that might be in this to make it sticky will turn to steam in the oven, which will also additionally help to rise your bread rolls. Now, by kneading, we are activating gluten. And gluten is the stretching net that I just told you is going to help you to have the CO2 trapped within the rolls. And to develop gluten, you need to knead the bread dough for about 10 minutes. What we're looking to be able to do after 10 minutes is to carefully stretch the dough and almost, if we lifted it to the window, be able to see through it without it breaking. Now you can see that my dough, when I try and do that, is breaking. This window pane test, as it's called, isn't ready yet because I haven't developed the gluten. So you need to go away and you need to knead this for about 10 minutes, and when you think you're there, try the window pane test where you gently try and open it, the bread dough, so it's thin enough that when you hold it up you can actually see light through it. I'm going to carry on and knead this for 10 minutes, and I'm going to rejoin you once my gluten has been developed, once I've kneaded it for long enough, and then I'll quickly show you how to shape these and put them into the oven. Just to let you know, at the moment we've not turned the oven on. This is deliberate. We're going to do what's called a cold prove, and I'll explain that to you when I'm shaping the rolls in a minute. Thank you. So I've been kneading my dough for about 10 minutes now, and what I've managed to do is conduct the window pane test properly and know that this bread is ready. So as I slowly make the dough a little bit thinner, before it breaks, if I held it up to the light, I'd actually be able to see the light coming through it before it tears. That means that I've got enough gluten developed to hopefully trap the CO2 in, which means that the bread rolls will rise when they go into the oven later. Now I've got a baking tray here which I'm going to use to cook these rolls on, and all I'm going to do is take a pinch of flour that I used to make the bread with, and a second pinch, and I'm just going to sprinkle that on top of the tray. That should help to stop the bread sticking. Now I'm going to shape these rolls. So first thing I'm going to do is cut this dough in half. Try to be as accurate as possible, but you don't need to use the scales. You're then going to cut each half into 3. So you will end up with what will equate to 6 bread rolls at the end of this. So I'm then going to try and roll them into a similar shape so that I'll be able to see if there are any that are huge or too small by a long way. There we go. They actually don't look too bad, so I'm happy with that. Otherwise I could take a little bit from one and add to another. Now, different shaping techniques. Depending on whether your dough is sticky or quite dry will tell you whether your dough is quite pliable and able to be shaped and manipulated or not. And that might determine what shapes you have to make. Now this is quite a nice sticky dough, as you can see, and so this will lend itself to being manipulated well. So I'm going to show to you just a few of the different shapes you could try. The first one is just a basic round bread roll. You need quite a sticky dough to do this, and you push down with your hand on the work surface, and you have your bread roll in between, and you roll in a circular motion with your hand, and then slowly you just lift the heel of your hand up so that you then have the bread roll like trapped inside your hand as though it's a net, and that just makes a plain basic round roll. Now you can choose to shape all of your rolls exactly the same shape, or you could choose to make your rolls 6 different shapes like I'm going to. The important thing to say is that each bread roll has to be one piece of dough. You can't combine 2 pieces of dough together, otherwise you'll have a roll that's much bigger, and when it goes into the oven the bigger roll will take longer to cook. So it will either be raw when the others are cooked, or the others will be burnt when your large roll is cooked. Next shape I'm going to show you then is going to be a knot. Now if you watch how I roll this out, this is how you know that your gluten is developed. I'm rolling it into a sausage shape, and as I lift my hands up, you will see this dough is shrinking back. That tells you that the gluten has been developed and the dough is nice and elastic, and it will trap those CO2 bubbles from the yeast in there. I'm then just going to tie a knot, just like I would do if I was tying a knot on a pair of shoes. And that goes onto my tray. Next shape I'll show you is a similar shape, because you start off by making a sausage shape again. So again, watch the dough as I let go of it as it recoils and becomes shorter. You could either turn this into a scroll by going one side one way, the other side the other way, and it looks like a scroll and can go onto your tray like that. Or you carry on rolling and you turn this into a Catherine wheel. Now, to make the dough stick, because otherwise it will just ping open in the oven when the heat hits it, you can just pinch that end onto the other end of your roll, and that should hold it together. Next roll shape that I'm going to show you then is, I'll show you how to do like a twist. Now, you might remember the charity ribbons that sometimes you have that are shaped in like a twist shape, and this is very similar to that. You take a piece of dough, roll it out again, put it the middle of it over your finger and just twist it. A couple of twists, and that goes onto your baking tray and will cook. Next shape I'm going to show you is a cottage loaf. You need to take 1/3 of your dough and 2/3 of your dough. So you've still got one roll, but you've got two smaller pieces to work with that will join together to make one roll. You turn those into two balls like this, and then you stick the smaller one on top of the larger. Get yourself a teaspoon and you press down right the way through until your teaspoon comes out at the bottom. Give it a twist, and this should help to stick the two parts of the roll together. The last shape that I'm going to show you is a plait. Now, you're going to take your one piece of bread, one roll, and you're going to cut it into 3 equal sized pieces. You're going to roll these out into a sausage shape, and you need them all to be about the same thickness, and they must be the same length. So because I know this dough will recoil, I'm aiming to go just a little bit longer than the first sausage each time, so that it allows them to have a chance to recoil a little bit. Once you've got your three bits of dough that are the same length, you're going to pinch the top of those, and that will, again, like with the Catherine wheel, hold this roll together. We're then going to, hopefully, if you know how to plait, this is easy. If not, go and do a little bit of research on how to do a plait if you want to have a go at this one. But we're going to go from the outside edge into the middle. And for those of you that do know how to plait, you want a tight plait here, otherwise you end up with 3 breadsticks, not one bread roll. That goes into the middle. Then you go to the other side, and the one on the outside, the other side, goes in between the middle of the other 2. And you carry on repeating this. Now, you must try to get this as tight as possible, otherwise you'll find that this won't be a bread roll, it will be 3 breadsticks that are vaguely joined together. So I've made this quite a tight plait, and at the end I'm just pinching the end together, and that then goes onto the tray. Now, I've tried to give the bread rolls as much space as possible on the trays, because the yeast will help these bread rolls to improve and will help them to get larger, and so they will take up more space. Sometimes students like to put their rolls right next to the edge of the tray. It makes it really hard to get off the tray because the dough will stick to the side of the tray. So just come in a little bit from the edge. Now, I said to you not to preheat your oven. There's a reason for this. We know from the yeast experiment that yeast likes time to be able to work, because it doesn't happen immediately. It took about 20 to 30 minutes for our yeast in the yeast experiment to go and do its thing. So, we've tried various ways at school. We've put bread into the grill, which isn't turned on, but the heat of the oven keeps the yeast warm. But we've tried this method that I'm going to ask you to do today, and in the last few attempts of doing this, it's worked really, really well at school. So the oven is not on yet, and I would like you at this stage to ask your parents or carers to help you, because you're going to get your oven gloves on and you're going to place these into the oven. Now we know that the oven is not turned on yet, it is off, it is cold, but we still want to put the oven gloves on. If yours is an oven door that opens sideways, like this, then you're going to need somebody to open that door for you. I'm going to open this and place these bread rolls into the oven. I'm going to shut the door, and once that's shut, I'm then going to turn the oven on. Now you need your parent or carer to help you do this, and you're going to turn it on to 200 degrees fan oven, 220 degrees if it's a non-fan oven, and about gas mark 7. So whatever it is you do to turn your oven on, you now need to turn this on to the temperature that's right for your oven. Now, the science behind this is that yeast likes warmth and it likes time. As your oven preheats and gets a little bit warmer and a little bit warmer, the yeast will enjoy that, and the yeast will be able to multiply and ferment. As it ferments and multiplies, it produces that CO2, which is going to be trapped inside the gluten net and help your bread rolls to rise. This is called a cold proof oven, or a cold oven proof, but we found it to be quite successful at school. The bread rolls, whenever I do them in my oven at home, take about 20 minutes in this manner, so in a cold oven proof. Depending on your oven, it might take a little bit longer or a little bit less time, but what you're looking for is for the bread rolls to be well risen and golden brown. Now if you wanted to, before you put these in the oven, you could glaze these if you had a little bit of milk or if you had an egg. I didn't want to do that for these ones, or if you had some seeds to sprinkle on, you could absolutely do that. But for these, I've just put them in the oven now, and I'm going to show you what they look like and how you know when they are ready. Obviously, before you're going to take them out of the oven or check them, you are going to need to ask your parent or carer to be with you and to do it for you if you're not sure, and you will ask them to help you to take anything hot out of the oven. The last thing to say to you is you need to make sure before this comes out of the oven that you're going to do some washing up, because you've got your washing up bits to get finished. But you also need to get either a cooling rack or a heat-proof mat ready to put these onto, because when they come out of the oven, the tray will be very hot. I'll rejoin you when my rolls have cooked so that you can see what they look like, and then we can hopefully have some great rolls to eat. Thank you very much. So my bread rolls have been in the oven for about 20 minutes. Like I said, you'll need to have a little look and ask your parents and carers to help you when you think your rolls are ready to take them out. I used oven gloves to take them out, and obviously when I'm opening the oven door, this oven's a really hot temperature that it's been on, so I did open the oven door and I counted to 3 before I carefully went in to take the tray out. I would be very happy if you were to get your parents or carers to take this out of the oven for you. So the bread rolls, the tray's been out maybe 3 or 4 minutes, but it's still very, very hot, so I can't touch it unless I'm using oven gloves. But you can see my bread has got a really lovely golden colour. It has risen really well. You can see that my cottage loaf, which had the little roll on top of the bigger roll, has really expanded and changed shape quite a lot. When you're thinking about testing whether these are cooked or not, if you take one of your bread rolls, and please, these are very hot, so ask your parent or carer to help you do this safely. You tap on the bottom, and if you can listen to the noise it makes, it sounds a bit hollow, and that tells you that the bread is ready. So if you listen, you're listening for that hollow tap to tell you that your bread is ready. So I'm going to leave these. They're on a heat-proof mat here, or a cooling rack, whichever you use in your home. I'm going to leave these here now to cool. The only thing to say is a couple of mine did get a little bit stuck. So I did use a fish slice just to go underneath them to loosen them off the tray before they got too stuck on there and came out the oven for too long. But they should, when they come out of the oven, leave them to cool down, and the tray, when you're looking to clean it up, if it has got a little bit stuck on the bottom, just soak it in some water for 5 or 10 minutes, some warm soapy water, and that should come off without problem. I really hope you enjoy making these bread rolls. They tend to go down very quickly at school when we make them. People generally find them really tasty, and I hope that you enjoy making them at home as well. Thank you.